Welcome to the Lost and Found podcast. I'm your host, Amanda. Join me each week as I rediscover my life's meaning, my passions, and my place in this world after leaving behind the only dream I've ever known. If you are dealing with self-loss, identity changes, career transitions, or you are still trying to figure out your life's purpose, then you're not alone. Join me. Wanderers are always welcome. All right. Hey, friends. Welcome back to the Lost and Found podcast. This is your host, Amanda Powers. And today I am joined by somebody who is truly blending heart with innovation in a way that I think you are going to love. Jeremy Horne is the CEO of Storypedia and the founder of the mobile app Winnie, which is a storytelling app designed to help families capture and preserve meaningful memories across generations. After 2 decades of working in the digital strategy space for major brands like Ford, Colgate, and Johnson & Johnson, Jeremy has made a powerful shift. He has decided to build something that would connect people and reach them at their core. So what started as a personal mission to document his own family's stories turned into a larger vision, one that now helps people all around the world feel more seen, heard, and remembered. So let's get into it. Everybody, please welcome Jeremy to the show. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here.
All right, Amanda, thank you for having me. And that was a wonderful intro. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm staring off to the side because I have 2 screens here. I haven't fully set up my desk the way I'd like it to, so please don't think I'm not paying attention to you. I'm just
No,
scrolling and
no.
using the space as best I can. But I am very excited to have you here. I have not heard of any app like this or any projects or creators that are out there. There's a lot of people out there creating content, but it often feels like a content to try and convince you of something or to believe in something else or buy something from them. And this is so nice because it's something I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I just want to share stories. And so I think it's a very unique product that you're offering. So I'm so glad you can be here because this is a whole show about storytelling and sharing our own experiences in the hopes of helping each other evolve and grow and heal. And so this is so cool.
Well, thank you. And I mean, what we're doing is really at the heart of what Winnie and Storypedia is about. So really the entire thesis is amazing things come from really good conversations. So the goal is to encourage people to have better conversations and provide them with some tools that can actually help them have better conversations, because it's not as easy as it should be. To a certain extent, we are losing the art of just having good conversations for a number of reasons. And as I say, what we're doing, I mean, I am always up for talking about anything, but certainly talking about what we're doing with Storypedia and Winnie, because you get so much out of a conversation. Like, just always good things will come from a good conversation. It's as simple as that.
Oh, for sure. And with the rise of podcasting, growing exponentially at this point, you're getting in on the ground floor in a good way to help expand that process and help people improve their skills. So I think that's really cool. Let's start with your own origin story, your lost and found moment. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the moments in your life that led you to care so much and care so deeply about preserving these family stories and your own emotional legacy. What inspired that for you?
So my family's a small family. It's me, my sister, and my parents, and we had grandparents in the UK, which is where my parents are both from, and grandparents in New Zealand, which is where my dad's parents eventually moved over to. And because of that, we didn't have any cousins. So growing up in Australia, where we eventually moved when I was around 7, we didn't have any cousins. We didn't really have any family anywhere nearby. I mean, every time we wanted to see family, it was a big trip. Perth is one of the most secluded cities on the planet, which is part of its charm. But when it comes to connection, especially back in the 80s, when long distance phone calls weren't very good and they were very expensive. So it just made communication very difficult. And I do think that sometimes when you have to work hard at something, you do actually appreciate it quite a lot more. And this kind of dovetails into conversations around AI and really what I call the cost of convenience. And whenever we go down a path which is, let's call it the short route versus the long route, it certainly has its benefits. AI is a wonderful example of this. I spend a lot of time in the AI space, but there is always a cost of that convenience. And one of those costs of convenience, if I send an emoji to a friend as opposed to getting on a call, or even better, drive to go and see them, I get so much more out of that. So getting back to kind of where we started in terms of my origin story, my family being between the UK, and we were in Australia, and the rest of our family over in New Zealand, it meant we had to work really hard to stay in contact. And I remember having these crackly long distance calls that would cut out, and not necessarily knowing exactly what to talk to my grandparents about. They didn't necessarily know what to talk to us about, but my parents worked very hard on making sure that we were every week having a conversation with them. And we used to send audio tapes to each other as well. I mean, literally, we would we record an audio onto a tape, and then my mum would post it over, and then my nana and granddad, and again, this was led mostly by my nana, whose name is Winnie, by the way. So my nana Winnie would then record another audio from their side, and they'd send that back. So over the course of several months, we'd have this very slow moving conversation where we would tell stories for the most part, because when you've got an audio, it's a monologue, and you would sit there and you would essentially tell stories about what you've been up to and what's been happening and so on. So because of that, my nana was particularly good at telling stories, and this is why the Winnie app is actually named after my nana. Incredible storyteller, and the very first person that I actually video interviewed to record life stories. And I just really liked the name, and I thought it lent itself really nicely to the idea that you can hop on the phone, you can share Winnies and things like that as well. But anyway, that's really where it all began. Was me as a kid in the '80s with my sister and my parents, and sending audio tapes backwards and forwards, and occasionally having these very difficult long distance calls. For anyone who can remember them, there was always a horrible delay. So as you're speaking,
Yeah.
the other person's speaking, and then in the background, you've got your dad and your granddad saying how expensive it is, and it's time to hang up, and you've literally just said hello. So all of these difficult, awkward moments, but like anything that's difficult and awkward, you build a skill set from that, and that's really where it all began.
How difficult that would be, because I would remember it's almost like you're playing phone tag, but you're not just doing phone tag, you're doing it like across the globe tag, trying to come up with
Yeah,
the rest of the story or share what happened. And by the time you get it back, so much has probably happened in between the moment you sent it to now to receiving it again.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot to update it with each other. And oh my gosh, if I'm sure if she was still around, is Winnie still here? Or
So no, unfortunately, Winnie passed away, but I was luckily living in the UK at the time. So I used to. She was in Manchester, and I was working in London, and I used to catch the train and go up and see her every month and hang out for a weekend. And again, got so much video of her, and she really was just such a great natural conversationalist, and I learned a lot from
yeah.
her.
That's wonderful, and good that you got to spend so much time with her. I'm sure she would be very proud of the product that you've created now. What would you say was one of your favorite stories from her that you collected?
Well, I mean, she had so many, but I mean, it was always so interesting just hearing about the olden days. I mean,
Mhm.
these are kind of like the proper olden days when, like, literally, and this is the amazing thing that I find is that we, certainly my generation, are connected, first person connected to another generation where a lot of them didn't even have electricity, and they were being born at the end of the First World War, and then they were adults during the Second World War. So they've had these lives that have been exposed to so many things, and to have had conversations with them and to be able to remember those conversations and those stories firsthand. Again, there's so much that comes out of that. But I remember my nana telling me stories, yeah, like I said, really about the olden days and what it was like before they had electricity to the house, and that they'd be playing games outside, and the gas man would be walking around lighting the lights, and she would walk off to the local pubs. I mean, England is full of pubs on every corner, but less so now than it used to be. I mean, pubs were literally the place where people would go to connect pre-TV, and everyone would just hang out at the pub and have conversations. And Northern England, where the weather can be very difficult sometimes, the pubs would have a nice toasty fire, so they'd go in there. So my nana, at a young age, would get sent to the pub to go and buy a beer, which she would then carry back home for my granddad. And she told me a story once where on the way back, she was really thirsty. It's quite hot, so she thought she'd try some of this beer. And she must have only been about 9. So she
Right.
tried a bit of beer, got back home, and my granddad complained and said, "What's going on? They've only filled it up half full. Go back there and get it refilled again." So she had to go back and say to the bar manager, "Oh, it wasn't full enough." And apparently she gave him a knowing. He gave her a very knowing look, which was like, "Well, hang on, you've either had some of this or you've dropped it." But he
Right,
didn't want to
yeah,
get her in trouble, so he filled it up and back she went with the beer. But there are so many
yeah.
anecdotes that I've recorded, and we get to watch to this day as videos.
Well, that's so funny. And it sounds like a typical silly 9-year-old to go, "I don't know where
Yeah,
it went." Like, "What are you talking about? It
exactly. That's
evaporated,
right.
it's hot."
Yeah,
Yeah, or, "That's just how they do it, dad." Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my
that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
gosh, versus nowadays, if my 9-year-old niece ended up drinking a beer, we'd all freak out, but
Exactly, that's a
it's a
thing,
cultural
that's a
difference,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, through those stories, though, you then realize that your nana or your grandparents were young ones. And what
Yeah.
happens is you actually build a stronger sense of rapport when you start hearing these stories about what they were doing when they were much younger. Because otherwise, you come into the world and your grandparents, even if they're not old by sort of standards of age, they could be in their 40s perhaps, but they seem old because you're so young. And as you get older, they just keep getting older. So they always seem old throughout your life. So this sense you have of your grandparents is, well, they're old people and they grew up in the olden days. But when you have these conversations with them and you hear about stories about when they were young and mischievous things that they did, you do build up a different form of relationship with them. And again, that's why I think it's so important that we have the opportunity to connect with our grandparents. And that's really what Winnie's all about. It's not just grandparents, it's not just parents, but just in general, just building rapport through shared stories and conversations.
I think that's really really important. I was saying before we started recording that I had moved recently, and I actually moved into my great grandmother's house, and
Oh,
so
wow.
she's had this property for, or her family has had the property for, I think like 100 years or something like that on my dad's side. And so I live at the top of the hill. My grandmother and grandfather live at the bottom, and then my parents are about 30 minutes away. And
You are so lucky,
my mom's
honestly.
mother is 5 minutes away. So I moved to help take care of more personal things that were just going on within the family. And of course, it helps me out to save money to live with family, but it's very different now because you're right. I remember being a little kid and coming here all the time and like playing and imagining and telling stories to them and drawing and doing all these little activities. And now as an adult, your sense of time shifts because you're like, well, now I have a career, now I have a relationship, now I have my own kids, now I have all these other responsibilities. You let some of that go by the wayside. And so I started to realize, I'm getting old enough to where I know what's coming, and it's kind of like I need to pay attention to what's going on with my relationships, and if they need help now, I'm going to do it now because I can, right? Instead of waiting until it's too late.
I'm just so glad that you had that foresight, because I think the risk is that we do get caught up in the day to day. We do get caught up in our own lives because there is
Yeah.
so much going on. And I think even in this day and age, we put so much more pressure on ourselves. But to be close to family, like geographically close to family, it's no longer the norm, but there is so much benefit that comes out of that. To have everybody there and to be able to get together for whatever family dinners and just those unplanned moments where you can call up whatever your dad, your mum, your grandparents and say, hey, let's meet up and do whatever. Those experiences are quite often where amazing conversations happen and incredible memories happen. And I think the beauty of having everyone nearby as well is that it takes a lot of pressure off the big moments, which could be Christmas, Thanksgiving dinners, whatever your family get togethers might be. But the trouble with those is that there is so much pressure to have an incredible experience
Right.
because the rest of the year you're not spending time together. It's too much pressure. Like quite often, those experiences aren't as enjoyable as they should be just because everyone's trying so hard to get so much into these short spaces of time, as opposed to just having each other nearby and just having these serendipitous moments where you can just get together and create memories.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely have a lot more empathy for my or sympathy now for my mom understanding why she was so stressed all the time in my childhood when those things were happening. It's kind of like, "Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
you're trying to make it perfect because 'cause we're only
Perfect.
here
Yeah.
twice a year." Yeah, yeah, so it's very different now. Oh, man. Well, I know that we kinda discussed a little bit, and in your intro, I mentioned that you did not start out as an entrepreneur, is that correct? You worked as, like, a digital strategist for some other brands, you were in marketing and advertising kinda stuff, so tell me a little bit about that pivot moment when you decided, "All right, I don't think I want to do just this anymore. I want to go out on my own. I want to create this app." What were you thinking and what inspired you to do that? What was that moment like?
Yeah, so there's been a, I don't know, this kind of gravitational pull towards turning Stirrupedia into a company for a number of years. And I've always enjoyed technology. So my career has been getting paid by companies to help them define products, launch products, market products, and so on. So I've built that muscle through the work that I've done. But in parallel with that, I've always been interested in building things and creating things. And because as a kid, I was fascinated by video. I mean, to me, it was literally like time travel. The idea that you could record something and then go back and kind of re-experience it again was just incredible. And so when my dad brought home an Ease video camera that was this enormous thing that you'd have to sort of put on your shoulder,
Oh yeah.
and it was about as big as me. But I would cart this thing around, and my grandparents, so my nana Winnie and her husband Jack, were over from Manchester. And again, this was fairly. He's not long after we'd moved to Australia. Um, and I was using this camera to do all sorts of very unimpressive video things. But the one thing I did do was point at them and ask them questions about the olden days and things like that. And that little bit of video that I have of my grandparents from all those years ago became one of the most important things that we had, because it went from VHS to eventually CD-ROMs and then onto digital and so forth. So it's stayed with our family throughout the years. And I was just really, the older I got, the more I started to appreciate how important that little bit of video footage was. And I kept doing things like that with friends, recording my own stories. I was kind of vlogging before, like literally
Yeah.
before mobile phones and things existed, where I just stare at the camera and just tell some stories, and recorded my family, my friends. As I've got to my age, and this is a strange age now where I'm at, because it's what I call this kind of sandwich age, where you've gone through this period of life where it kind of feels like it's all about you. Your parents are there, they're worried about making sure that you're healthy and you're happy and everything's going really well. So you've kind of got these guardian angels keeping an eye on you. And for the most part, you're just thinking about yourself. Like, where are you going to go to college? What are you going to do after college? When are you going to get your first job? Where are you going to work? And you really don't have much to worry about except yourself. And it's just a naturally selfish stage of life, not in a bad way. It's just the way that it kind of works out. But then you suddenly find yourself having kids and having parents who are getting older. If you're fortunate enough, maybe grandparents who are also getting older, and you suddenly start being very focused on their health and their happiness. And because of that, and just having, in my case, having these experiences of being able to record family and friends and things like that, I now find myself being asked by my friends to go off and interview their parents, their grandparents, and capture their stories, because they're concerned. They're concerned that their parents are at an age now where there's less years in front than there are behind. That's even more obvious once your grandparents are into their years. And if you're very lucky, some of my friends have got grandparents now in their hundreds, their early hundreds, and they really, yeah, no, yeah, it's amazing, and they really want to capture these stories. And so, my friends, knowing that I've done this as a hobby for a lot of years, most of my life now, have asked me to record these stories. So it was something that, getting back to your original question, it really something that just I was doing anyway as a hobby, as a passion. Then I started to think, well, how can I scale this out? Because I can't be everywhere for everyone to do these individually myself. So that evolved into, and I had so much video content. I was like, well, how do I share this in a way that it doesn't get buried into YouTube? So originally I put them up on Vimeo. And then eventually I set up a platform called Stories for Life, which is where all this video content lived. And then I had some friends who were saying, look, like, you probably need to do something with this and turn it into something. And I'd been thinking about what that might be for some time, but really with support of just some really good friends, one in particular who's really, I count as a co-founder, and his wife, Lara. So my good friend, Carl, who I got to know in Perth, and his wife, Lara. Carl spends a lot of his life investing in companies and building companies up and so forth. And really, with his help and his network and some of his close friends, it allowed me to turn Storypedia into a company, which we did a couple of years ago. And we focused on family and friends. So that's really what the Winnie app's all about. But Storypedia is a platform. It's a platform of connection. I call it a human connection platform. And our goal is to find all sorts of different ways to help people build stronger social health, stronger connections.
You've talked a bit about that, where we're starting to lose our, I believe we said, it's like the breakdown of that intimate type connection too. And you've talked in previous podcasts about the human-centered tech, and that's a really important part of your business. So I'm wondering, what exactly does human-centered tech look like in practice, and why has that been so important for you and your personal growth?
Yeah, so there's nothing better than getting humans into a space together, physically sat with each other, because there are all these subconscious connections that are happening and nuances, and it can feel quite awkward sometimes as well. I mean, that initial bit where you walk into a room and it feels like everyone's already getting along and having conversations, and you're walking in and you've sort of got to find a way into the conversation and so on. And again, as I said earlier, that awkwardness is kind of where the beauty of it is and the magic is, because you're then building a muscle. You're getting better at being able to converse, and everyone's feeling it, even if it looks like everyone's already having these wonderful conversations and you're coming in and not quite sure what to say.
Yeah.
Everyone's kind of gone through that and figured that out. So that's the best experience, getting a bunch of humans together into a room, getting together with your friends and family. But the next thing is, well, how do we then use technology? And I talked earlier about having these very crackly long distance conversations that we'd have on the phone when I was a kid, sending audio tapes backwards and forwards. But that was us using the technology at the time to build connection. And now we live in a world where we can do what we're doing now, where we can literally have a video conversation, which is
Yeah.
essentially free, and the audio is incredible, the video is incredible. At any point, we can pull out our phones and pretty much wherever we are, as long as we've got a data connection, we can have a video conversation. But there's not that many people doing it. In fact, what most people are doing is they're sending text messages to each other and sometimes conversing just through an emoji. And as I was saying earlier, that's great, that's convenient, it's quick, but there is a loss that comes from conversing in that way. So really, I'm looking at how do we use technology in a way to help connect humans in a more meaningful way. And in the absence of being able to get together physically, how do we do the next best thing around that? And the obvious one is the fact that we can have these video calls and these conversations, but then how do we use technology to encourage people to use them and feel comfortable using them, and just use them in a way that does actually build up these meaningful connections. And that to me is what human-centered technology, at least from my perspective, what that focus is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. For listeners that may have not had the opportunity to use the app yet, how is Winnie different from if I just want to FaceTime with you, or if I want to use WhatsApp and we do a video call or something like that? What makes Winnie unique, and how it does it help preserve that digital legacy and connection between the two people that are sharing those stories?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that is in speaking with investors and people, that sometimes they'll say, well, I can just get on a FaceTime call and I can share a video onto YouTube and things like that. So really, what Winnie's doing, let's say, think of it as you're on a FaceTime call or a WhatsApp call, and whilst you're on that conversation, and maybe you're having a chat with your granddad. So it knows a bit about your granddad based on stories that your granddad's recorded. It knows a bit about you based on where you live and your age and stories that you've recorded as well. So it's going to suggest prompts. And I've actually started to sort of move away from the word prompt, because prompt now is everyone thinks an AI prompt, but a prompt in terms of a conversation prompt, or a question that's relevant to your relationship, relevant to your granddad, and
Hmm.
vice versa, relevant to you. So whilst you're chatting away, questions will pop up on the screen and say, why didn't you ask your granddad about this? And it could be as simple as, how did you meet Nana? Like, where did you guys meet? So the question could be, tell the story of how you guys met. It could be a question of, what's it like knowing that there are less years in front of you than there are behind you. And obviously, it's not going to ask that question to a 7-year-old, right? So it's asking contextual questions based on the relationship, based on who you are, based on the sorts of questions they've asked before. So these are what I would call conversation starters. And by providing those, it's just taking away one of those questions, which is, especially with grandparents and grandkids, they do get to an age on both sides where they're not quite sure what to ask each other. And surface level questions like, how was school? What studies are you doing at the moment? These are good sort of entry questions. But if you want to have what I would call a meaningful conversation, then you've got to ask questions that help get to a more meaningful conversation. And there is a quote, certainly Tony Robbins is one of the guys who said it. I don't know whether it's attributed purely to Tony Robbins,
Yeah.
but the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your questions. So we're really trying to help people have better questions, ask better questions, because there is a knock-on effect to that. And I would say the quality of your relationships are directly proportional to the quality of the questions that you're actually asking each other and taking a real interest. So that's one of the things it's doing. The other thing is, it then gives you the opportunity to then record the stories that come out of that. So it's not just asking each other the questions, but then during the actual call that you're having, or it can be any time that someone's got the app and they just pick it up and they choose to answer a question in the app. But at any point, you can then record your answers to that. And we're very focused on who gets to see it. So you can decide who actually is a family member, who's a friend, or perhaps you do want to have something. Some people love recording life tips and just making them publicly available, so they sort of go into the public pool of content. But within your family group, anything that you record and you say, well, this is my nana, this is my granddad, these are my siblings, my parents, everyone will then get to see those stories. So what it does mean is that any stories that your grandparents have recorded now live within Winnie, and they get surfaced in a number of different ways. So again, another example would be you wake up in the morning of your birthday and your friends and family have been pinged a couple of weeks beforehand through the app to say, hey, it's Amanda's birthday coming up. Why don't you record a story of 3 things you love about Amanda? How does Amanda make the world a better place? Tell the story of the first time you met Amanda. And so then all of those stories can get put together. So you wake up in the morning and you don't just have a bunch of random happy birthday pre-canned messages coming through Facebook. You have something that's deeply emotional and connecting to your friends where they're actually telling stories relevant to you. And then all of that becomes part of, and again, I go back to Storypedia being this human connection platform, all of this content where your friends are talking about you, your family's talking about you, you're recording your stories, you're talking about your friends and family. All
Yeah.
of that content can then start to create what we call forever you. So the idea that you can have this avatar if you want to have it, which is this very authentic avatar that's based on your stories and your friends' stories about you, so that you can converse with yourself and eventually friends, family, and future generations, many generations down the track, can have a chat with Amanda. And it's based on stories and content that you shared and people told about you as well. By the way, I should say that Forever You at the moment it is something that we have available, but it's on a request only basis. So that's something that we're figuring out how to scale up. But I think
For
that's another part of it that people seem to find really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad you went in depth with the answer because it
I
definitely
did,
gave
didn't
us
I? Yeah.
it gave us a good explanation about the balance between innovation and AI, and going back to the heart of the issue, which is human to human connection is getting more and more rare these days, especially as technology integrates so much into our lives. Like, you're carrying a computer into your pocket every day just through your phone, but it's a computer, a recording device, and social media content planner, and your connection piece. And so if sometimes I have interviewed some people, or I've run into friends or people that don't really know what to do in a situation unless they have their phone with them. And so trying to get that reconnection back there is so important. You're right. I've thought a lot about how to ask better questions of people that are older than me, or my family members that have been around a bit longer, or like trying to get advice from them. Because you can ask same thing when you talk to ChatGPT, you can ask a basic question and it'll answer the basic question. But if you ask it in a strategic kind of way, or more thought provoking way, it'll give you layered responses, and then you
It's a
can
really,
up with that.
really
Yeah.
good
And like,
analogy. Yeah.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
like teaches you these things. So I'm really glad that Winnie, it's not in your face AI, like it's not an obvious chat GPT situation, but the prompts or the questions that it offers you helps you layer through. And then you do have such a nice, like a story encyclopedia of all the videos that you've collected and saved. So that's a really great way to connect. And I wish we could go back in reverse, like almost if you could go way back in time and like meet everyone else's older grandparents or older
Be
generation,
amazing. It
connect.
would be
And
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, like who is George Washington's great 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 granddaughter, and how do we figure out how to reverse engineer talking to him in some way? It'd be, I don't know. It's so cool that
And
something like
also,
this could exist.
well, and the bit where George Washington was second guessing himself, right? He's like, "Oh,
Yes.
geez, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just not sure whether this is the right move." And
Yeah.
seeing this human side of anybody
Yeah.
again, that's where we connect. We're like, "Oh, wow, like so and so thinks a bit like I do sometimes." So we now have this common ground that we can connect on. We can build rapport around that. And again, that's something, you and I had a chat before we actually started the podcast, and we were just talking about, what's happening in the world. And unless you're having good conversations, this is where disconnection happens. And yet it is so easily fixed by having the up communication lines and having conversations. I honestly believe that anything can be made better by having good conversations and just keeping those lines of communication open. But unfortunately, we're just not doing enough of that. We're really not.
Well, and since we're not, I'm curious if you had a lot of frustration trying to get this off the ground, or like while you were trying to build it and explain it to others, the like trying to explain the importance of why people should care about what it is that you're creating, and be involved and add videos to that content library and improve it, right? Like the app in and of itself, it sounds like it can't get better without adding more stories to it, so it can like build off of learning everybody's background. So I'm curious if you ever had a moment where you were getting frustrated when things maybe weren't turning out the way you wanted to while you were trying to build this out, or if you ever had a moment like that in your career where you're just like, I'm hitting a wall, like how come I can't get through here? Like what am I missing? What's going wrong?
I have those moments all the time. So it's like I think when you're doing anything that is important to you, you're always running into brick walls, basically, that you then got to figure out how to get around these walls or through these walls. And again, every time I do, it's the reason that I'm able to find a way through is through conversations. And that's conversations with different stakeholders who are part of Winnie. So we have advisors, and these are people who've figured things out for themselves. So people who've built companies and gone through all the challenges that come to the point where you have a successful exit. It's always through conversation that I'm able to figure out, well, what is the next right step, and also what is the right way to do this, because you start out with a plan. I mean, really, what Winnie was 3 years ago when I was talking to people about the idea, and what it is today is, there's probably 10% of what I thought it was going to be when I started that conversation 3 years ago. And I would say probably what it will be 3 years from now will probably still be a fairly small percentage of what we've currently launched with, because we will get feedback and we'll figure out the way that people want to use it and so forth. But yeah, the challenge, the biggest challenge is nobody thinks it's a bad idea to have better conversations and to connect more deeply with your family and friends. I'm yet to meet someone who says, oh, why would you want that? I mean, everyone signs up to the idea that, yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, all right, that's great. Everyone loves the idea of family history. Um, and obviously, a lot of people have invested a lot of time in putting together family trees and things like that. The challenge is still getting people to be comfortable with having better conversations, like getting people to pick up the phone, open up Winnie, and to have a meaningful conversation. So that's something that is always going to be a challenge. And I think the way that I look at it is it's up to us to just figure out how do we make that more compelling. So one of the things, for instance, is we have conversation cards. So physical conversation cards that you can have at the dinner table. We've got a pack at our house, and my 7-year-old son loves it when we pull the conversation cards out at dinner, and he loves answering questions. He'll hand them out. He'll get me to answer one, my wife, and so on. So the
Yeah.
conversation cards is another way of striking up those conversations, and they have QR codes on them so that if you want, you can then scan it with the app and then record the stories that come out of those conversations. And obviously that's optional. I mean, if you sat around the dinner table, it may or may not make sense to start recording some of those stories, but that's one of the ways that we help break down the barrier to pulling out an app. The other problem with an app in this day and age is apps kind of there is a sense of app fatigue, because there are so many apps out there and you're kind of vying for space, very important space on someone's phone, where really you want to be on the home screen, you want to be top of mind. So again, that comes back to us. How do we, as the provider of a service, make sure that there is no friction to actually getting to using it, and how do we essentially make sure that it's a joyful experience to actually use the app? So anything that you enjoy doing and doesn't require friction has a much greater chance of being used in your life. And like I said, cards are one of those options, providing some motivation around, well, what becomes of the content. So like I said before, that use case of it's your birthday and it's your mum and dad's anniversary. So you're getting reminded to record stories about those sorts of things. And one of the things that did come out in some of our early testing was people were using Winnie just to record moments. So it wasn't necessarily a story where they were answering a prompt, but they were pulling out the app and they're recording a moment. That could be anything. It could be that they are at a birthday party and they're celebrating something, or they just want to remember a moment in time and share it with their family and friends, and perhaps with future generations as well. So we then just created the ability to record a moment. So you've got 3 minutes and you record a moment, you can talk over the top of it. And those moments, again, start to become part of your life experience, your life history,
Yeah.
and things like that as well. But yeah, we've got to listen to the people who are using Winnie and using Storypedia, and we've got to make sure that it gives them what they need in their sort of day-to-day lives with little to no friction.
Yeah. Does it integrate at all with other social media apps? I know like sometimes if you record someone's answer and you liked it, or it was a funny story or something like that, can it convert and I could save it and send it to Instagram or send it to TikTok or?
It needs to. It definitely needs to. So the answer is no, but it's definitely on the roadmap because
It's on the list.
I
Yeah.
mean yeah, and it definitely needs to do that because ideally, if you're on a WhatsApp call, we want to be able to present a very similar experience within WhatsApp, but then again record those stories back into the Winnie app so that it all goes into what we call this Wikipedia of human stories, the Storypedia platform. Because once you've captured that, then you can do so many more interesting things with them. Your example of, well, what if I'm on another app and I don't necessarily want to use Winnie in my day to day? That is definitely something that it's a nut we need to crack for sure.
Yeah. The reason I ask is I've had people ask me, how did you get so confident talking on camera? Or how did you get so confident saying these things on the internet or whatever? And I was just kind of like, I'm not confident at all, not all the time, right? When I first started, you could tell in the early episodes, like my voice kind of shakes. I say a lot. I pause a lot. I don't know what to say next, sort of situation where I get frustrated or whatever. But I think the thing is that I knew that if I didn't tell the story or I didn't share whatever it was that I was feeling, I would feel worse. So like keeping it in was less desirable. Not whether or not I impressed anyone or made it perfect, but that's just kind of how I started to build up my own confidence. I know that the more I did it, the easier it got and the more comfortable I would get with like, I'm just going to put it out there and I don't really care if anybody likes it or not. I liked it. I did it because it made me feel better, kind of a thing. So I know that if there was something enjoyable that happened in the Winnie app, if you had the ability to export the video or save it in whatever platform's version, I think it'd be really easy to just transfer and upload straight to the other ones too. Or vice versa. If they found a story, oh, this story is really funny. My grandma would love it. Let me send it to her in Winnie and then she can respond in Winnie and I can get her, record her reaction to this or something. That'd be,
Yeah, no, 100%, and that's when it starts to become more engaging. So you can kind of export a story from Winnie, so you can definitely do
Mhm.
that, and you can share it into social content, and you can also share it with people who aren't using Winnie. So let's say you're
Yeah,
with
cool.
your yeah. So one of the nice things is if you are sat with your parents or your grandparents or even just a friend, you can pull out the app and you can record their story into your app, and then you can share it with them afterwards. You can put their phone number in; it'll send them a text message. So you can do those sorts of things, but the other way where you're pulling content in that you might have recorded just to your phone or whatever it might be, we haven't got that one working yet, but we definitely will.
Yeah, I like that. It also kind of reminds me like this could also turn into like a boutique situation where if there is a specific event, like how they have, you can rent a photo booth and it'll print out the 6
Yeah,
or 7 photos
well,
or something for
weddings,
you.
right?
But
Yeah,
now maybe you could do like a Winnie version where you've got a Winnie tent somewhere and people
yeah.
go in and it's grandmother's 90th birthday or it's so Becky and John's wedding and like everybody goes in there and they say their message and it's saved and like goes straight in there or like you put the QR code on the table and you scan it and record it and it sends to their Winnie app profile and then they can watch them later or something like that because I
Amanda,
know
you,
sometimes
you need to be on the product team. These are great
well,
ideas and experiences.
well, it's so funny. I used to be a very, very creative, artsy young child, and I went into the complete opposite. I did a 180 and did 10 years in counterterrorism and national security stuff. So I gave up art and creativity for a very long time. And so
That is a big pivot. Yeah.
yes. And then I pivoted back in 2022. And so now I do work for a marketing agency. So I do this podcast on the side, but I do love the podcast and it has brought out so much more of a creative side of me. And my parents got to the point where they're like, all right, you have so many ideas. We're going to have to pawn you off onto our friends at work at local government or something. You need to go Leslie Nope yourself somewhere else. There's so much. We love you, but we don't have the energy for all these things. So you go do them. But I love it. I think you have so much growth and opportunity because technology is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
Stories don't change, but the how people share the stories will. And just there's more and more opportunities for you to collect them over time. And eventually I think you could even do like branding events like with, like a celebrity thing, or if there was like the US Open or something like that, like getting to interview all of the athletes and like when was your first time you were here compared to now? How do you feel? And it'd be interesting just
Yeah,
to get
that's
different sides of
honestly
people.
that's a perfect example because so my parents being English are massive Premier League football fans. My dad for Arsenal, my mum for Manchester United. But we've talked about doing collaborations with sports clubs so that it's not just the players, but it's also telling the stories of like what was it like to have been at the 1969 whatever match where this happened and so kicked a goal in the last second, and hearing those stories from the fans again is another way of just connecting with the experience and then connecting to the club.
Yeah.
To me, stories are literally the fabric that connect us to everything, and they give value to everything. This is why stories are so important. So conversations are critical. You can't have a story without some form of conversation. But then really powerful conversations and connection happens when you can then tell it in some sort of storytelling format. And that's what you talked about with sports teams and weddings and everything else. That to me is really where the magic is. And that comes through from the sharing of story.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool. I can't wait to see that for you one day where you're on the marquee too, and
Yeah, me
people get
too. Me too.
yeah get to
Yeah.
share that. Yeah, that'd be really fun. Well, I'm also curious. What are some of the ways that you're seeing current families or current users use Winnie that has surprised you or inspired you?
So the one of the questions that's really popular is what are the values that your family name stands for? And this is one that certainly people in my age group and above seem to really gravitate towards. And it makes so much sense. I mean, the idea that, in my case, my name's Horne, Jeremy Horne. So what does it mean to be a Horne? What did it like how did I even come to be here, right? So hearing the stories that have allowed me to be where I am and knowing things about my grandparents. And I mean, most people don't even know the names of their great grandparents, right? They just know that they had great grandparents, but a lot of people don't know the names, yet alone the lives that they lived and the experiences that they had in order for them to have their kids, who then went on to have their kids, who then went on to have, in my case, me. So it's the fabric of connection, which I really hope people would use it for, but it's really good to see the way that people use it in that sense. And I've got a story with well, both of my grandparents. So my granddad on my dad's side, so dad was born right towards the end of the Second World War in the UK, and they were living in London, and there was a stray bomb. So whenever the bombers were going back, whatever bombs they had left, they'd just drop them just to be mean. And one of them landed. So the sirens are going off, and everyone's getting into their bomb shelters in their back gardens. And my granddad's shuffling the kids. So dad had two siblings, so there's three kids and his wife, and he's shuffling them all in. And then a bomb lands on the house a couple of houses up and takes out the entire house. But shrapnel from that then hit my granddad as he was getting in. And I remember as a kid, he had this big scar on his head. My nanny used to say it was from shrapnel. I didn't really even know what shrapnel was. But then hearing the story later on in life when it did make sense, I mean, had that just been slightly deeper or had he been a little closer to that, he wouldn't have been there. And then I wouldn't, well, actually, so I was saying shuffling my dad, and my dad actually wasn't born at that time. So this was just before my dad was born. So my dad wouldn't have been born. I wouldn't have been born, obviously, as well. So
Right.
just hearing these stories, and similar one on my mum's side with Winnie, my nana, where she was waiting for her again in the middle of the war, and she's waiting to see if she can get a job at a jam factory, and she's waiting for about an hour, and then in the end she thinks, what am I doing, waiting for a job at a jam factory, and just walks off. And because of that, then she decided to go back to Manchester. And the room where she'd been staying for the nights before, that very night, got hit by a bomb directly. So had she been in that room, she wouldn't have been around. So again, and this was when my nana was in her late teens, early 20s, I think. So then my mum wouldn't have been around, and so on and so on. So just hearing these stories and understanding that all of these little events that have kind of contrived to allow me to be in the world and to be where I am today, it gives a sense of kind of meaning and gratitude, really, just for the fact that I'm even here. And I think when you have that sense of meaning and gratitude, it gives a lot of extra purpose to what you're doing, like whether it's winning or just getting out of bed in the morning and just being happy to be alive.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You have so many near misses where there were moments throughout your generations where something could have gone completely differently. And if they hadn't, you wouldn't be here now and you wouldn't be
And
able
we
to
all do.
collect those
We
stories.
all do. I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you hear the stories of your family and your ancestors, everyone's got them. Like in order to live a life, at some point there have been near misses, and everyone's got them, and the only way you're going to find out about them is to ask about them. So this is
Yeah.
my big thing. I'm like, just please interview your parents. Like, just pull out your phone. Obviously, use Winnie if you're happy to use Winnie, but just at the very least, just record them, record those stories, so that at some point you've got them and you can capture them with video or just with audio. It doesn't really matter, but just record those stories so that you take the time to have that conversation, and then you've got the option in terms of having that recorded.
Yeah, for the listeners that are now interested after listening to your conversation, they're now interested in interviewing either one of their parents or their grandparents, something like that. What are some questions that you would suggest to them to try or ask?
Yeah, well, one of my favorites is what advice would you give to your younger self is always a fun one. And another one is, what's been the best decade of your life? So, and again, when I used to go up and see my nana in Manchester, and I asked her, pretty much that exact question, like, if you could go back to a younger age, where would you go? And she said she'd go back to being 60 something. I was like, really? It's like, you've got any choice here. You can go back to anything. She's like, no, 60 was great. She said, we would go to the dancing, and we'd hang out at the club, and we'd chat with our friends. And at this point, she was mid 80s, so
Mhm.
25 odd years back in time. But that in itself was quite uplifting. I was thinking, well, I'm a long way from 60, so it's good to know that potentially some of the best years are still in front of me. So I think asking those questions, but I think the most important thing is just to ask questions, because one of the problems that we have, and I talked a bit earlier about the cost of these shortcuts, is ever since Google popped up and the ability to go online and get a quick answer to pretty much anything, and now whatever your choice is, maybe it's Perplexity, maybe it's ChatGPT, but we've got these shortcuts to getting these answers. And what we're essentially doing is we're kind of cutting out the wisdom and the elders in our worlds. So you've got this group of people who live lives who have so much wisdom and so much to share. And it wasn't that long ago when we would spend a lot of time with them and asking questions and learning from them. And now, geographically, that makes things difficult, because a lot of families are distributed around the world, so they don't necessarily have easy access to their grandparents. But even the ones who do aren't necessarily making the time to actually have those conversations with them, because so many of those answers, whether it's like, how do you get whatever, a cake to rise really well, or how do you make the perfect whatever, or whatever it might be, all these things that our grandparents have learned over the years, we're just not asking them. So the most important thing is just start asking those questions, because only your grandparents can give you answers that relate to their specific lives and their family, and you build that sense of rapport. And it's really important for them. I talk a lot about social health, and it's not a term that I've coined, but it's one that I've latched onto because it makes so much sense, because there is so much actual health, mental health, and even to a certain extent, physical health based on studies that comes from just having really strong relationships. And again, to have these strong relationships, I believe you just got to have good conversations and make the time to connect with people. The most important thing is, don't necessarily get caught up on the questions. The Winnie app will help you with those questions, but most important thing is just sit down, start having a conversation, take a genuine interest in each other, and good things will come from it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad that you mentioned just asking your grandparents in general, because I don't know if your grandparents did this or not, but anytime my mom or I would ask my grandmother, how did you make such and such dessert or item, or where did you buy that? Where did that come from? Or how did you make that dress or something? She'd always be like, well, I took a pinch of this and a piece of that. And, I found it only on Wednesdays, and you can only do it you have to stare into the sun and do it exactly at this, like, it's
Exactly,
never,
that's right. Yeah.
nothing's precise in anything that she would ever make, but it was always perfect. The final product would come out exactly as is, and she would just be eyeballing it the whole time. And we tried once. My grandmother, we call her Grammy, she has a chocolate cake with caramel icing, and she has never written it down. She just makes it from memory. And so we had to record her once. And so I don't know if my mom still has the video or not, but that'll be a good question to ask her. And I was going to record with her for the 100th episode for the podcast. So you've inspired me to come up with a couple
What a great idea. I
extra
love that.
questions. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if she'll fully understand what it is I'm doing, but I think if I go to her, I'll have to take all the recording equipment and stuff to her house and sit with her. I don't think she'll come to me, but that's okay. It'll
Yeah,
be
that's
fine.
okay. And it's one of those experiences that she will love, that you're taking an interest in her life. Even if she doesn't understand that it's a podcast and it's going to be listened to by people through podcast apps and things like that, she will
Right.
just
Yeah.
love the fact that you're there. I mean, with my nana, I would sit there with the video camera, and she would talk for hours. I mean, literally I'd have to swap tapes because she would just chat away, and she had no context as to why I was recording it really, but she just enjoyed the conversation. And
Yeah.
most people do. Like I've had so many people who are like, "Oh, no one wants to hear my stories," and like it always ends up where I'm like, "Oh, actually, I need to like free up some space on my phone here in order to keep recording," because people, for the most part, love it if you take an interest in their lives, and that they love that sense of connection. And the older people get, the more they really do appreciate sharing those stories because they've got so much to share. And
Right.
again, there are so many opportunities that we have to ask questions. It is the long route because, for sure, if you call up your granny and ask her something, it's going to be a half-hour chat. It's not going to be a 3 second chat GPT search, but you're going to get so much out of that. Like it is, I use the analogy when I was chatting with someone else and said, you've got a 12-lane superhighway that's going to get you from A to B in 10 minutes, or you can take a 3 hour walk through the forest that spans along next to it. You can't do that every day, but you're going to get so much more from that walk. You're going to hear the birds, you're going to be breathing in the fresh air, you're going to have time with your own thoughts and everything else. So there is always so much to be gained from taking that long route, even if practically you can't take it all the time. But just be aware of what you're missing out on when you're constantly taking the shortcut.
Yeah. I agree. If you can find a way to go out of your way to do something like that, you will connect much more deeply. And I've heard several times now that your brain processes information at 3 miles an hour. So like when your brain heals or your brain comes up with the answer or your brain does whatever, but your ability to cognitively process is optimal when you're walking and engaging in low to moderate exercise like that. So it makes sense that you would feel better on the 3 hour walk, but you wouldn't necessarily need to do it all the time. But I like that. What's one story that you hope people will remember you for?
I hope that people will remember me as someone who genuinely cares about connection. I hope my friends will think of me as someone who's present when we're having a conversation. And I do have to force myself, like when I'm hanging out with my son, and in a lot of situations, to not have my phone with me because it's just so tempting to have the phone. And you mentioned earlier about some of your friends who, when they don't have their phone with them, it has become a crux in so many ways. Um, so I mentally tell myself that I'm gonna sit here with my son. So a good example might be that I am on my phone and I am doing something, and my son comes over and he's like, check out whatever it is, some Lego that he's made. I have to then force myself to say, put the phone down. Doesn't matter. I'm in the middle of something, and let's make eye contact with my son and let's talk about why this Lego aeroplane is so important. And let's ask a few questions about why he put the bits where he put the bits and things like that. And that's my hope, is that my friends, my family, the people I care most about will think of me as someone who cared about their lives, their stories, and cared about having just a real connection with them.
I love that. And I have no doubt that they will, especially if you continue down this path. What do you think you have learned about yourself, or what has this process of creating the Winnie app taught you about you?
Well, it's taught me that I always like things to be perfect before I put them out into the world, and that's never helpful. So it's taught me to do something that I just find very difficult to do, but that is to just put things into the world, get feedback, evolve them, and progress them. And it's still something I'm learning to do. I mean, I can definitely just work on something until I feel that it's perfect. And what the learning there for me is that even though I think it's perfect and then I put it into the world, it's only then on reflection I'm like, oh, actually, no, that was only 10% right. And the other 90% I figured out by putting it out into the world. And all of that time that I spent trying to get it there, I could have just put it out there and got that feedback and figured that out and iterated and moved on. So it's really, I've kind of had an inkling of that as being one of my bad habits for some time, but certainly going through this process of building Winnie, talking about Winnie, and everything else that comes with it, is just getting it to the right level and getting it into the world and getting that feedback.
Well, that's good. I think we all have a little bit of perfectionism somewhere buried in us, and it's hard to let go of that sometimes too. I know for me, especially with this project, like I want it to be the best of the best or the best that I can make it. And it's kind of like, all right, remember you have all these other responsibilities too. So if it's not 100%, 80, my dad likes to say 80% is better than perfect. Like 80% is better than nothing. You can still get it out there and you can refining is also part of the process. If you
Yeah.
never put it anywhere, you're never going to get the chance to refine and actually make it better if you're trying way too hard to wait for it to be perfect, because perfect doesn't always exist.
I'm not sure it does, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, again, all of these little things that I spend so much time thinking about and putting out there, and then I will watch as people engage with them, and they don't notice them. It's just, and it does it because at the end of the day, they don't matter. Like what matters is, does it fulfill its primary purpose to help people connect? And we've got this mascot Winnie the Penguin because my son loves penguins. So there's a story behind that. We rescued a penguin when we were in New Zealand.
No. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this poor little guy had washed up, and basically it's we took him to the ranger, and hopefully that penguin is thriving to this day. But yeah, there's a story behind the penguin, but there's all these little kind of animations and things like that within the Winnie app. And at the end of the day, yeah, they're important to me, but the app didn't need to wait for those things to be there to actually get that into the world, right? So it's things like that that I've really learned to just catch myself and be extra diligent about not getting caught up in some of those little things.
Yeah. If you've mentioned your son a couple of times and he enjoys the concept of the Winnie app. If you could only leave one video message for your son and that's it, what would the one video message be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I have left him video messages, and it would be something along the lines of that he's very much loved by me and his mum, and regardless of where he's at and what he's doing in his life. And the most important thing that I would wish for him is just to be true to himself. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's one of those cliches that I think we don't necessarily live into enough of the time. Like we're so concerned with what other people might think and what you're doing in order to make money, whatever these things might be. And I really would just want him to understand what that means, and just be true to himself, and just follow his heart, follow his passion. So it'd be something along those lines, but hopefully I'd word it a bit better than that.
No, that's okay. I put you on the spot, but I think it's a good message, and the leaning into being true to who you are. Sometimes that's one of the hardest lessons for anybody to learn. Not everybody grows up with that kind of just inherent confidence where they know, I know who I am, what I want, what I'm willing to not do or will do, and what that's going to look like for me, and how to live a good life from my perspective. If you get caught up worrying about how do I compete with everybody else, or how do I measure up to whatever society is telling me I'm supposed to measure up to, and when you don't follow through on that, it can hurt, or you take it personally, or you start to think that you're a failure, and it snowballs quickly. And then honestly,
Exactly.
if you learn to lean into who you are, the right people that love you and support you will show up, and the people that won't do those things will leave, and it just makes more room for you to be happy and content with exactly who you are and what you have and what you bring to the world. So I think that's a really important message for him. Of course, you've also mentioned in previous interviews that like one of the core missions for Winnie is to help people feel seen, heard, and remembered. What does feeling seen, heard, and remembered mean to you personally?
Well, everyone's got a story. I mean, and I said earlier, people that I've interviewed start out by saying, no one wants to hear about my boring life. And I'm like, well, let's just sit down. Let's just have a conversation. And eventually, literally hours later, and I'm either swapping tapes or recharging the phone. So I think to me, it means just giving people the opportunity to talk about what's important to them, what experiences they've had in their lives. And it's true to any age. I certainly see it playing out though, and this might just be the nature that I've recorded a lot of people later on in life recording their stories. But certainly I've seen that people really do want to share stories, and everything from just, well, quite often actually their stories are quite often about their family. So it's not necessarily them saying, hey, I did this, I did this, I did this. Quite often the stories that people are sharing are, they want their parents to be remembered. They want their grandparents to be remembered. They want their close friends and their siblings to be remembered. So a lot of the time, those sorts of stories tend to flow really freely. And I kind of have to probe for some of their personal stories about things that they've done and things that they've achieved and things like that. But that to me is the opportunity to be seen and giving people the opportunity to be seen. And again, it's so important. So much good comes from that.
I think you're 100% right. When people can feel validated in that way, I think it helps even the playing field, I think, a little bit more, where they're kind of like, oh, well, if it's not bothering you, then sure, I'll keep going, or I'll keep sharing this thing, or I'll keep doing this thing. And you get like that light up feeling. I'm sure you film so many people now, you can start to notice like when it start to turns on, like when someone gets an idea or when someone like feels they're very happy that you asked them that specific question because it triggered a very specific memory, and now they get to share the thing that reminds them of something fun or lovely or happy or funny or whatever. And it could change the whole vibe of a whole room sometimes when you just
Yeah.
find a way to ask the right question to someone. Yeah. And I think that's really good. Well, I have a few core questions that I ask all of my guests at the
Okay.
end of our episode. So the first one is, what do you want out of life, and have you found what you're looking for?
So I mean, out of life, I want to have a really close connection with my family and close friends, and it really is that simple. And it's one of those, again, it's a cliche, right? Like the idea that people get to the end of life and they've amassed massive amounts of money or fame or whatever it might be. All they really care about are their family and their closest friends. I've always been conscious of that. And not, to me, that would be horrible to get to the end of your life and no longer have any runway to be able to do anything about it and feel that you made the wrong decisions about where you focused. So yeah, to me, that's the main goal is strong connections, genuine connections with my family and friends.
Love that. I think that's a good one. And you're definitely well on your way for that. What would you say has been your greatest achievement?
It relates to that, to be honest. I think by being aware of, and I don't know why I'm aware, but I think it's really just the values that have been installed into me from my parents and my family, my grandparents, and so on, and my sister, who's a wonderful human being as well, if she's listening to this. But I think just being aware that the most important thing is family and friends who feel like family, like relationships, essentially. I think that's probably my greatest achievement is just having that sense. Now, getting that right all the time, I'm not saying that I've achieved it, but just it's something that I'm always working towards. Is how do I build and maintain really strong relationships with the people I care most about? So yeah, but in my mind, the two of them tie together.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. How do you define purpose, and what does living in your purpose look like to you?
So for me, purpose is something that feels bigger than just me. So it's something that I can help bring to the world, that will have a bigger impact than just something for myself. That Storopedia and Winnie ties in perfectly with that, because my purpose here is to provide a way for people to connect in more meaningful ways, to build rapport, to have stronger families, to hopefully put a dent in what has become a loneliness pandemic to a certain extent. So when I go to bed at night, I'm thinking about it. When I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about it. And hopefully, the way that I'm approaching it will have an impact in a positive way.
Yeah. Well, and especially for the loneliness pandemic, I think you're 100% right. We're the most digitally connected that we've ever been at any point in history, and yet we're the most disconnected socially and emotionally than probably ever before, because we don't actually practice that human to human connection so much. And I think what you're doing is going to create quite the ripple effect, and impact people in ways they may not even realize, or it's happening in that moment.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned this question earlier, so I hope it's not a cliche to ask you, but if you met your younger self, or you could talk to your younger self, what would you say to him now?
Yeah, I'd probably tell him not to blow dry his hair because it'll probably make it all fall out one day. That's probably one of the
It
main
doesn't
tips that
even
I'd
matter.
give.
Yeah, don't even worry about
Exactly,
it.
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think otherwise I'd say, look, like, just it's all good. Like, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, don't change anything. I wouldn't want to risk that classic butterfly effect, right? Where it's like you try to fix one thing and then something else happens that you were completely the unintended consequences of changing things. Like I would simply tell him that I'm a happy grown up now, and I have been, and I'm surrounded by amazing people who help my life to be amazing. And so just, yep, you're on the right track. Keep doing what you're doing. Just don't blow dry your hair. That's basically where I'd finish it.
Yeah, I mean it's a good lesson, and yeah, and I think a lot of the times if you could go back to your most anxious time period or your most self-doubting moments, you could be like, hey, you actually figured this out and it's fine,
Yeah,
or you actually figured this out and it doesn't end up the way you want it to, but that's actually better because this opportunity shows up. So
exactly.
you
Yeah.
can't worry about it. Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. I like that. All right. And to those in our audience who are facing their own what now moments and they're feeling lost, they're unsure, they're overwhelmed with what's going on in their lives, anything of that nature, what would you say to a person that's feeling lost to help them find their way or to take their first step to change their life?
So that for me is an easy answer, is find somebody and start a conversation and start a meaningful conversation with somebody. And we've all got somebody in our lives that would be very open to having a meaningful conversation. So if it's not a parent, if it's not a sibling, if it's not a family member, it's a friend. If it's not a friend, it's going to be a community service where there are so many good people who are just ready and waiting to have a really good conversation. But everything good comes from a good conversation. And so just make the effort to start that really good conversation. And like I said earlier, it can feel incredibly awkward. It shouldn't, because it's the most natural thing that humans have evolved to do. But it can feel incredibly awkward. But you've got to get through that awkwardness in order to get all of the wonderful things that come from it. But that would be it. Just find somebody to start a conversation with, and like I said, don't worry if the first 5 minutes just feel incredibly awkward, because eventually you will get into a rhythm. They will as well, and good things will come from it.
Yeah, and sometimes just getting started at all helps you. Even if
Yeah,
you stumble the first time or the conversation may not go as well as you would like, at least you put yourself out there, and putting yourself out there is sometimes just the first step that you need to take. So I love that.
exactly.
Thank you so much. Jeremy, this has been so much fun, and I've had such a great time chatting with you and hearing about all things with Storypedia and Winnie. So please let all the listeners know, what's the best way to interact with you or to use your app or how to find you, plug away.
Well, thanks, Amanda. I've really enjoyed this as well. So thank you very much for having me. And Winnie.chat would probably be the best place to go. I mean, you can track me down at jeremyhorne.com. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, far more active on LinkedIn than I am really on other social channels, aside from Winnie. So track me down on Winnie if people want to get in contact. And anyone who jumps into the app, I try to connect with them and request a story from them and share stories for them as well. So yeah, that's probably the best places.
Excellent. And you can do that on both Android and the Apple products.
That is a good question. So no, you can't do it on Android, which is a pity, because I've got some really close friends who are dying to get in there and they can't. But we're working on the Android version. So at some point soon, yes. But right now, for the MVP, we just wanted to get feedback and see what works, see what doesn't. So for now, it's only on Apple.
On iOS. Cool. Good to know. All right, everyone. I will make sure to put all of Jeremy's information into the show notes, and you know the drill. Like, subscribe, rate us, leave a review, give us those 5 stars. Let Jeremy know what's up or what your favorite story is for him to know. And go ahead and download Winnie and check it out. Can't wait to see everybody on there and sharing more stories together. And we're going to send Jeremy all the good vibes so that he can eventually get all of his brand deals and collabs and be at those Arsenal Stadium games. That'll be so fun. And we'll see you guys next week for our Monday and Wednesday episodes. But you can reach out to me at hello@podcastforthelost.com. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. All of those links will be added to the show notes as well. And remember, wanderers are always welcome.